Good morning. We'd like to go ahead and get started now. I'm Jamie Van Ostren, the director of the Center for Energy and Sustainable Development. I wanted to just introduce our first speaker, Charles Larry Harris, who's the chairman of the board of the Appalachian Stewardship Foundation, is the co-sponsor of the conference this year, along with the Center for Energy and Sustainable Development. So we thought we'd get this started off with Mr. Harris giving us some introductory remarks.
Thank you, Jamie, and welcome to all of you. It's a pleasure to see a good crowd here, still coming in, and we're right on time starting, which is 10 minutes late. But I'd like to begin by telling you a little bit about the Appalachian Stewardship Foundation. I suspect that many of you don't know about the history of it, so let's see if this works here. So, brief history of where we came from. Initially, there were a whole lot of groups that were trying to stop the Longview power plant from being built, and the reason was that we had already about 5 power plants within a 25-mile radius. But that process went forward, and eventually they got an air quality permit from the DEP. And at that time, 3 groups, Trout Unlimited here, and the council in the state, the Sierra Club, and the National Parks Conservation Association filed a formal appeal of the air permit. Within a very short time, Longview lawyers contacted us and asked if we could consider a settlement. And so we started meeting. The 3 groups hired a consultant, a person who was an expert on power plants, and she looked over the permit and made suggestions. And we also enlisted an environmental law firm, the Joe Lovett's group, to represent us. And as a result of this, we did come to a settlement. And the settlement is like the short version of the settlement for purposes here. Lowered emissions of both SO2 and the nitrogen oxides was one thing we accomplished. Lowered particulate emissions as well. The first mercury monitor in the U.S. on a coal-fired power plant. I don't know if there's any more now, but there are others. They all have them now. But this is the first. And the establishment of a mitigation fund and also the formation of a new 501c3 with board members from TU, the Sierra Club, NPCA, and Longview Power. So that was the settlement. And so we formed formally as a 501c3 in 2010, and our board members, I represent Trout Unlimited. William DiPaolo is here. Maybe you can wave his hand. He's sitting right back here. He represents the Sierra Club. And way in the back, so you can make a quick exit, perhaps, is Peter Kiefhaber, who represents the National Parks Conservation Association. Steve Nelson represents Longview Power, but he's not able to be here today. But Joe Douglas is right down here from Longview. So that's the group. And we have a very competent staff of 1 person. And that's Shonda Minnie, our executive director, who is, I know she's, way over here. She's also in the back for a quick exit. And along with Professor Van Nostren, those are the 2 people who really put this together and did all the hard work for this conference. So we want to recognize that. So what sorts of things that do we do? I mean, I was a professor here at WVU and chased money my whole life, as we all do if we're in the academics, but this group is able to use the mitigation fund to fund worthwhile projects around the state. And when we started, I don't think there were many other funders that could fund the kind of things that we do. What do we do? Well, in general, we do projects that mitigate the energy development from whatever source that is. So one of our goals is to fund those projects that reduce greenhouse gases, for example, to reduce energy usage or get greater efficiency. And there's going to be a whole panel on that today talking about energy efficiency. We'd like to fund carbon sequestration projects. I don't think we've done much in the way of research, but lots of planting trees. And there's a few people in the audience that have gotten that funding here today. And stream restorations. I'm looking at the people that are involved here, and there are lots of good projects that we funded to restore streams that have been damaged by either acid mine drainage or acid rain or some other type of energy development. And then we fund many alternate energy projects. Solar installations probably is the main thing that we've been funding. So that's what we do. And that's us. And today we funded a couple of climate change, or we helped fund a couple of climate change conferences at Blackwater Falls, and I see Mr. Rod out here. And we got the idea, why don't we do something here today about energy and some of the ways of environmentally dealing with things. So just so we're all on the same page, and because I don't know if any of you saw the public TV on the NewsHour when the Clean Power Plan was revoked, they interviewed Gina McCarthy from the past administrator of the EPA. I don't know if you've seen that. And then Bob Murray of Murray Energy. Anybody see it? Somebody see it. Well, Gina McCarthy said pretty much what I'd expect her to say since she's the co-author. But I was amazed by some of the things that Bob Murray said. So the three that I remember, he said that we're not really, there's no climate change crisis. The world is really cooling. And the ice caps are thicker than ever. And humans don't have anything to do with the climate change. It's just a natural cycle that the world is in. So I was kind of amazed by that and the politeness of the commentator. He didn't challenge anything that he said. So I thought I'd show a couple slides just to kick things off today, just to go see how right he was. The first one is just what is climate change, and there's just got oh, no, that's got something I didn't want to do. Okay, I don't know if it's got a pointer, but what you can see here is that one aspect of climate change is the increased temperature over time. Back here you see it's fairly stable until you get into the heat of the Industrial Revolution when we started burning a lot of fossil fuels, and then you see the temperature continue to rise. And that's one aspect of the climate change. What causes it? Well, I think most climatologists and climate scientists would agree that the increased temperature, which you see is the orange line, and by the way, I got the data I'm showing off the EPA website. It's from a 2016 climate change report. I don't know if it's still there, but I got it a while ago before maybe it was removed. And so it was not only the EPA, but 25 universities were involved, and I think 4 other federal agencies in getting this data, just so you know where it came from. So what you see here is increased temperature, again in orange, and then the yellow line represents the increase in CO2 in the atmosphere, now above 400 parts per million. I'm sorry. Did you all hear me in the back or not? Okay, so increased levels of CO2 are correlated, therefore, with climate change. I wish I had a longer arm, I could point better, but thanks for pointing that out. And then the other thing about these cycles, this is some data. I mean, the people who did this report don't know how to make graphics. It's too busy, can't read it, but it's a simple message here. Going over to the far left, you see there's in the purple is the CO2 levels that they got from ice core samples back 800,000 years into the ice ages. And you can see that, yeah, CO2 goes up and down in cycles. It's true. And when you get into the light blue colors, that's past the Ice Age. You see it continues to go up and down. And it was going up, and then in orange is when the Industrial Revolution started. And now it goes sky high. And so, yeah, there are cycles, but we're at historically much higher levels of CO2 than ever before. So I don't, well, anyway, I don't think that, I think it's clear. Let's not say anymore. And then this slide shows what's called temperature anomalies, which means that if you look at the far left in the period of 1950 to 1980, temperatures in blue are cooler than the normal, in red, hotter than normal, and those days, therefore, are about even. As you can see with the white in the middle are the normal temperature days. And they follow what any mathematician would call a normal distribution. As you move through the 80s and 90s and up to 2000, can you see that there's a shift? And there's many more hot days and fewer cooler days and still also fewer normal days. And into the 2000s and up to the last decade, it's got even more extreme. So I don't think the Earth is really cooling off, as he said. And this is just some of the indicators of climate change. There are others. We have warming and acidification of the ocean. So as the ocean gets warmer, picks up more CO2, and therefore acidifies, and that's causing loss of species and loss of diversity and so on. We're seeing increased storm intensities. It's difficult scientifically to look at just 1 year, but look at the year we've had this year with damage in Texas and Florida and the Caribbean. Horrible things are going on with stronger hurricanes. We see flooding in some areas. The Northeast, for example, has had a lot of flooding over the last 10 years, and droughts in other areas. The Southeast had a big drought. We're in a drought right now, and so you're going to see extremes of temperature of these kinds of things as we continue through the climate change era. Some forests have dried out, and that leads to a lot of wildfires. And I like to go out fishing in the West, and this year they had horrible fires. Didn't go, not for that reason, but lots of people have had trouble because of the fires out there. You get increases in invasive species. Since I just mentioned western forests, I'll just say that there's a pine beetle that has killed, in some areas, like in northern Colorado, 90% of the forest is dead. I was there, I saw it. Green hills? No. Brown hills from all the dead trees. And this is also because we have warmer winters. They don't die off as much, so they're increasing. There's an early snow melt-off. The glaciers are receding all over the world. You have the mountains losing their snow earlier because of the warmer temperatures, and that, from my perspective, hurts my trout streams. So, but it does other things as well. So that's my climate change talk. And today, we're not necessarily just talking about climate change. You all have the program, so you can see the panels are around the energy future for West Virginia, and also some environmental discussions as well. And alternate energy is a part of it. So I thought I would share it with you, as my last slide, one of my favorite philosophers. And I don't know if you can read this in the back, but here's Lucy and Linus says, "Stand real still, and feel the warm sun on your back." Doesn't that feel great? And it's free. So thank you for their attention.
Thank you very much, Dr. Harris. I'm really pleased to introduce our next speaker, Dr. Brian Anderson. He's the head of the West Virginia University Energy Institute. He's also the GE Plastics Materials Engineering Professor in Chemical Engineering here at WVU. The Energy Institute, as you might know, is the central university organization. They keep us all coordinated in terms of both fossil energy, sustainable energy, energy policy, and environmental stewardship related to energy. We've asked Brian to give an overview of the demands of the new energy economy. Thanks, Dr. Anderson.
Jamie, thank you. And Charles, thank you very much for the intro talk on climate change and the ramifications that we are seeing due to our past energy economy. And that leads right into what are the demands on our future energy economy. In particular, when we think of trying to get energy to a developing world where there are still billions of people without power and clean water, and reliability issues in places like Puerto Rico when storms come through. And as we've seen in the news, there's a lot of interest and there's a lot of sun in Puerto Rico, and perhaps there's a better alternative for the existing grid that they have that leads to more reliability. And so there are a lot of challenges domestically within the state of West Virginia and internationally to try to support 7 billion people and moving upwards toward 10 billion people on the planet, feeding them and providing the energy that they demand to try to have a quality of life like we enjoy in the developed world. And so the demands of this new energy economy, I'm going to really focus more on what's the future of West Virginia and how within our state we have been dependent on the coal industry for the base of our jobs for the better part of a century, and that is changing, and that is changing due to the entirety of the energy sector. And so, well, as Jamie mentioned, we at the Energy Institute have 4 major pillars on campus that we are focused on in the research space, and that is in clean, low-carbon fossil energy, and I'll get into that. That is in sustainable energy, and I don't have a slide on it, but exciting, on Monday we have a kickoff meeting with the Department of Energy on a geothermal project here on campus. There's an engineering feasibility to convert our what is currently our steam that's provided from a coal-burning power plant on Beechhurst Avenue, but convert that over to heating our campus and cooling our campus using deep geothermal. And that project's in partnership with the Lawrence Berkeley National Lab, the West Virginia Geologic and Economic Survey, WVU, and Cornell University. And we're really excited about the potential of bringing geothermal out of the western United States and into the east. We also have in the sustainable energy area a lot of work going on in biofuels, and I have, our images here are indicative, and it was the big middle button, but the images here, we are working very well, and I can't really see where it is anyway. It's a tiny, tiny little dot. But this is a picture of the Neskavidler power plant and geothermal power plant in Iceland, which we are trying to replicate here in Morgantown, West Virginia. Growing biofuels, biocrops on reclaimed mine lands, work by Jeff Skousen and others in the Davis College of Agriculture here at the university, and how we can take brownfields and mine lands and convert them into biocrop areas. We also have a keystone project in the Department of Energy called the Marcellus Shale Energy and Environment Laboratory, which is the most instrumented natural gas well in the world in terms of measuring the environmental footprint, every drop of water, every drop of chemical that went on-site or off-site, as well as emissions monitoring done by the National Energy Technology Lab within the DOE and WVU, both School of Public Health and Civil Engineering. We measured everything that went on at this site, including water, and are working very closely with the Department of Energy on how to minimize the environmental footprint of the next generation of shale resources. So all of that as a context of the Energy Institute, we launched 3 years ago, specifically under new leadership of E. Gordon Gee, our president here at WVU, where we as a land-grant institution want to re-envision our role within the state. The Wall Street Journal a few years ago came out with a list of the most influential organization in all 50 states In the state of Washington, it was Microsoft, and in California, I believe it was Google. In West Virginia, it was WVU, and we were the only university on that list. And what that means is not only are we the largest employer in the state of West Virginia, but we have a mandate to help the state look for its future. And so that's what we're embarking on, is trying to envision what that future would look like, where it is a robust economy, where we have jobs for the people, we can get folks off of the opioid epidemic, and the best way to do that is to provide hope and jobs. And you'll hear this afternoon from the American Jobs Council on their take on this as well. And so we have three major goals: is to expand our research portfolio to about $60 million annually by 2025, and we have increased our energy research expenditures in the last 3 years by 48%. We are now $25 million a year, but we're growing that. To promote development in the state of West Virginia and do it sustainably, and sustainably in all aspects, meaning it's a sustainable economy, it's a sustainable environment, and it's sustainable development. And to elevate our workforce, because without an elevated workforce, we will not expand our economy. So we have a lot of major initiatives and partnerships across the university, including in natural gas utilization. How can we utilize the natural gas resource we have, both responsibly from a development standpoint, but then also in the downstream as we create new recyclable, biodegradable plastics from the ethane that comes from the ground. In coal utilization, we run in partnership with the U.S. Department of Energy, and Sarah Forbes you'll hear from here on the next panel, the U.S.-China Clean Energy Research Center Advanced Coal Technology Consortium, which is now in its 7th year, is a partnership between the U.S. and China in developing and commercializing technologies to minimize the CO2 footprint of coal production. And I will tell you, I'm glad Longview's here in the room, because if you don't know that the most energy efficient coal burning power plant in the Western Hemisphere is 6 miles north of us here is Longview Power, as the lowest heat rate, meaning it burns the least amount of coal per megawatt hour in this hemisphere. There are a couple plants in China that beat it because they have had a concerted research effort on advancing technologies and advanced materials, but that's why we partner with them in commercializing these technologies, so we can lower the footprint of coal production. We also work a lot in carbon capture and sequestration, as well as other carbon mitigating techniques like next generation combustion technologies, such as chemical looping combustion, where you use an oxidant on a solid material instead of in air, and it makes it a heck of a lot easier to separate the CO2 on the backside. We are active in developing some sustainable energy pathways with some partnerships with the Nature Conservancy, as well as the U.S. DOE's Energy Efficiency and Renewable Energy Program, not just the geothermal program, but in advanced manufacturing. We're playing a major role in 2 manufacturing hubs that are both $70 million DOE programs with $140 million of cost share from industry, specifically targeted to lowering increasing the efficiency of manufacturing, lowering the footprint. And so, just quickly, I want to highlight a program that WVU, Marshall University, and the West Virginia Department of Commerce has embarked on so far this year. It's called West Virginia Forward. And this, we engaged an outside consulting group to come in and work with us hand in hand over a long period of time to try to chart a path forward for the state of West Virginia. And just a quick summary, we're focused on understanding the strengths that the state has and the opportunities that are moving forward, and to try to create initiatives that will provide long and short-term successes in revitalizing our economy and looking forward, and that is the key. And so it all comes down to implementation. We can identify different economic sectors and economic enablers, and I know this is an eye chart. I don't know if we're sharing the slides, but these are available. If you go to West Virginia, if you Google WV Forward, you can find all of this information. But what we found is that for economic development, we need to both diversify our economic sectors instead of being reliant on large single entity types of industry sectors like coal, and diversify our economy, as well as improving performance indicators such as the workforce, the drug-free workforce and the educated workforce in the state of West Virginia. And so these economic enablers, they come down to the business climate in which businesses operate in West Virginia, innovation and business development, infrastructure, and human capital. And what I want you to take away from this slide is blue means we outperform our peers, Yellow means we're on par with our peers, and red means we underperform. And so how are we doing in the state of West Virginia? We got one blue one. And so there's a lot of room for improvement. There are some really good opportunities and ideas for us to move forward. And so where we do overperform our peers is in the cost of doing business. But we need to increase our human capital and our infrastructure, and that's exactly the types of initiatives that we're working on. So the value proposition comes down to the cost of doing business, and we do have one of the lowest employee turnover rates in the country. We have a loyal workforce that's very attractive to industry. We have a high home ownership rate, which goes hand in hand with that. The earnings per hour is on the low end, which means it doesn't cost businesses that much to employ our folks. And that's because the cost of business, or the cost of living and the cost of doing business is lower than all of our peers. And in fact, we have a business climate that is better than our peer states in the close region. And so now to move on to the economic sectors that we're targeting. And they all do come down to the raw materials and the resources, the human resources we have in the state. And one is in carbon fiber reinforced plastics. If you don't know what a CFRP is, it is the graphite shaft of a driver, or if you have a graphite bicycle, that is one example of a carbon fiber reinforced plastic. But you can take those materials and lightweight vehicles. You can revitalize bridge surfaces and bridge decks, and you can even make rebar that doesn't rust, that is stronger than steel yet lighter than steel. And so we are creating a cluster area specifically in this, and WVU actually has some intellectual property that we're working on commercializing to get out there and get into our roads and bridges in the near term. Another area is in fine chemicals because of the raw materials that we are blessed with and how we can use them more efficiently. The third is in higher-end tourism, and the fourth is in cybersecurity. And so some of the infrastructure that we need is in the state. We don't have that much good industrial sites. And so we're trying to learn from our peers and how we can certify sites to bring and attract business. And what this includes is brownfields redevelopment. It includes taking sites and remediating them and bringing them up to spec. And so our implementation structure is an MOU between WVU, the Commerce Department, and Marshall, and we're creating a structure of accountability with a steering committee that's across the state and have 4 different implementation working groups, the first of which is energy. And I know I did only have 15 minutes. We started a little bit late, but I want to bring now down to we all know that there is a shale gas boom in the region, and how can we do that? How can we take advantage of that sustainably, yet make sure that we provide the opportunities that are moving forward. And so we know that the natural gas production in the United States used to be in the South and Gulf Coast, but over the last 10 years, all of the growth in natural gas production has happened here in the Northeast, in the Marcellus. And because of that, our fuel mix of electricity production has changed. And what I'm showing here is national generation of electricity is no longer majority in coal. It is now the majority in natural gas. It flipped a little bit this year because in the West they had a really good rain year and some really good hydro in the Pacific Northwest, and they scaled back some of the natural gas production, which allowed coal for a brief period of time to overtake natural gas. But here in the Eastern Interconnect and PJM, which West Virginia is the only regulated state, fully regulated state in PJM, we have seen a tremendous market change in the capacity market for electricity production in PJM. We see that gas has come on. If we look at capacity markets work 3 years out, it's the capacity you're going to have in 3 years. And we see that in 3 years from now, natural gas will be the dominant electricity production. All of the capacity additions in PJM have been in natural gas, either combined cycle or gas turbine. And so we see now with this huge flux of natural gas coming out of the region that our neighbors are wanting more natural gas too, Virginia, North Carolina, Ohio. And so we see a tremendous amount of infrastructure being built. Many of it's controversial. We won't get into it. Between the Rover Pipeline, Atlantic Coast Pipeline, Mountain Valley Pipeline. And what that is doing is creating more demand in the region to suck the natural gas out. Well, what happens is, along with the natural gas, with the methane, is about 15% ethane. And if you burn ethane, just as a note, if you burn ethane, it does have a higher CO2 footprint than methane. So much so that right now, in the Marcellus, we are rejecting, quote unquote, rejecting about 250,000 barrels a day of ethane because we have nothing to do with it. We can't make plastics out of it because we can't get it to markets. When you burn 250,000 barrels a day of ethane, that's about 3 million tons per year of CO2 more than if you were burning the equivalent amount of methane for the same amount of BTUs. And so we're embarking on a project now to try to get that ethane off of the natural gas system and get it into consumer products. And that is something called the Appalachian Storage Hub that we're working on in conjunction with the states of West Virginia, Pennsylvania, Ohio, and Kentucky. And so if we look at the ethane that's projected to come out of the Marcellus, the big bar I want you to see is the big orange bar at the top. And that's the ethane that's going to be burned. It's in your furnaces, it's in our power plants, unless we make consumer goods out of that very valuable ethane. And so the American Chemistry Council has estimated if we're able to take advantage of that big orange bar in this region, we can create 101,000 jobs, $36 billion of financial investment, of capital investment in the region, an annual local and state tax revenue of $1.7 billion to the four-state region, and federal taxes of what is it, $1.2 billion. And so what we would make out of this is carpets and food packaging and pipes and siding and light-weighted carbon fiber reinforced plastics for vehicles to help the automobile supply chain lightweight their vehicles. And so there's a tremendous opportunity in manufacturing when we have all of the natural gas and natural gas liquids in the region. And so 2 years ago, and 7 days, the three governors of West Virginia, Pennsylvania, and Ohio signed an agreement here in Morgantown to work together to capitalize on this opportunity. And that comes down to the Appalachian Storage Hub natural gas, Appalachian Storage Hub natural gas liquid storage study that was led by a group out of WVU in partnership with the Geologic Surveys of West Virginia, Pennsylvania, and Ohio. Mike Hahn, the director of the Geologic Survey in West Virginia, is here in the room, and his team really led on trying to identify the opportunities to take natural gas liquids and create a storage and trading hub. And there are 3 different types of storage opportunities. You can do it in limestone, you can do it in sandstone, and you can do it in salts. And as it turns out, the state of West Virginia is very well blessed, much like the state of Texas, to create geologically a storage and trading hub. And the reason trading is important is because what that does is it allows the industry to see a transparent market. They can buy it off the spot market. Right now there are 2 people in the region who know how much you can buy ethane for, and that's not one that's conducive to bringing in industry. And so in summary, with the storage hub summary, the abundance of natural gas and natural gas liquids in the region is certainly an opportunity that we have to be very careful in moving forward. There are 2 pathways economically in the free market. One pathway is to build offtake pipeline to take it to Philadelphia and take it to the U.S. Gulf Coast, or use it within the region. And so those 2 economic pathways end up in 2 different end states. The end states for the country are, if we expand petrochemical operations on the U.S. Gulf Coast and in Philadelphia, then when we have Hurricane Harvey run through, we have even bigger of a perturbation to our national GDP when they have to shut down 61% of the U.S. cracking capacity that makes our polyethylene, that makes the seats and the fibers that you're sitting in on the cushions of your seats. When Hurricane Harvey went through, there are still crackers that are down today and will be through the end of the year, which means that there are manufacturers in the region that cannot get their polyethylene resin today because there is an undersupply. And so if we create the pathway where a petrochemical industry ends up in this region, we have the opportunity to put on new and best available technologies and create the new generation of the petrochemical industry. And now back to an early point I made about the National Network of Manufacturing Institutes and our partnership with the U.S. Department of Energy, is that both of those manufacturing institutes are focused on smart manufacturing and high-intensity process intensification so that we reduce the impact of the petrochemical industry when it's built again. And so that's, we have a very strong partnership on this project with the Department of Energy. Secretary Rick Perry is a great proponent, even was talking about this project in Philadelphia on Monday this week. We are working hand in hand with creating a blueprint for how we can build a petrochemical hub in this region, but do it sustainably and do it with the best next generation technologies. And so to run some economics, if we make ethane here, if we produce ethane from the ground here, it takes about 15 to 16 cents to ship it to the U.S. Gulf Coast, where it's sold this year. The average is 24.75 cents per gallon. And so that means that producers here are getting 11 cents when it's sold for 25 cents in the Gulf. What that means is there is a huge driver, economic driver, for this build-out to happen. But also one thing that you can't understate is that 70% of the plastics demand in the United States is here in the Northeast. So what happens to that ethane we ship down there is it's turned into resins, put on rail or trucks or barges and shipped back to the Northeast. And there's a lot of dead weight transportation loss, a lot of emissions on the road that is absolutely unnecessary if we put the production, put the manufacturing closer to the end users. And so all of this is part of our West Virginia Forward Plan, and I know I went way too long, I'm sorry, Jimmy, but I just get excited. But it's part of our West Virginia Plan about how we can at least start thinking about formulating a path forward. And I know I didn't get into all the initiatives. We have 167 faculty member affiliates at the university, all working on really exciting projects. And so I feel very unfortunate to only be able to highlight a couple of the things we're doing. But I know you'll hear about some of them today, and I applaud Jamie and the Center for Energy and Sustainable Development here at the law school and the efforts that they're doing and putting this together today. And thanks for your attention. Maybe we have time for some questions. I don't know. Any questions for Brian? Yeah. There's one here and then there. So in terms of the funding, the internal funding at WVU that we spend, I have a very generous donation from a family estate called the O'Brien Energy Fund, and that is about 50% sustainable and 50% fossil. And the 50% fossil includes a major program we have in rare earth elements, which is actually not fossil, because what you use rare earths for is for permanent magnets in wind turbines and things like that. So that's probably a little bit of a misnomer, but we're extracting the rare earths from acid mine drainage. And so it's actually an extremely exciting project. We have acid mine drainage sludge throughout the northern Appalachian coal fields, and they're a tremendous source for rare earths that can be used in the renewable sector. So that's the internal funding. Now, external funding, of the 167 faculty, many of them go out and get fossil energy funding from the Department of Energy, to where that ratio is closer to 75% of our external funding from the DOE comes in the fossil space. However, one should note that any project with the Department of Energy and fossil is specifically targeted to mitigating the effects of CO2 as emissions from fossil. I mean, that's the whole mission. And so if you compare us to University of Texas at Austin, who gets a lot of industry funding, we get a pittance of industry funding, actually. Yeah, and here and then.
You mentioned biofuels.
Mm-hmm.
I'm involved with the airline industry.
Yep.
You know that the large Australian airline just announced they're going to fly from Australia to Los Angeles on biofuels.
The Qantas, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Qantas, yeah,
Mm-hmm.
joining Virgin Atlantic and Lufthansa, who are already on biofuels.
Yeah.
But I'd like to ask you, are you looking into at all to cellulosic fiber to replace carbon fiber?
As a matter of fact, we are. So we have one of our seed projects under the O'Brien funds is specifically targeted toward using biomass and biomass waste from pulp and paper mills and the like, to then use that as replacement for carbon fibers and carbon products. And so we're working with NASA on that particular project. In the biofuel space, in the Davis College, led by Professor Jinxing Wang, we have a lot of work in woody biomass, because the resource we're blessed with in West Virginia is largely woody lignocellulosic material, beyond cellulosic. And so a lot of our work is in converting the lignocellulosic material into biofuels. And you can do it, there's biofuels, but then there's also using the biomass directly for heat, so through torrefaction, where you basically create something that looks like a coal, but you make it from biomass, and you can use that in co-firing, and we have active research in those areas, as well as biomass gasification, where you take biomass and you gasify it, you break it down into its smallest elements, mostly syngas, which is hydrogen and carbon monoxide, and then you can use that as a fuel. And so we have a lot of work going on those too.
In your diversification of the economy, are you focusing at all on the composites manufacturing industry?
Yes, and actually the carbon fiber reinforced plastic is a composite, but then we also have wood plastic composite work a lot. Rakesh Gupta and chemical engineering has done a lot of work in that area. And then I want to get to, there was one last question. Yeah.
Tom?
Real quick.
Yeah. On the question of the ethane storage hub that you were explaining about,
Mhm.
I'm not quite clear whether you're seeing that as something that seems to be very much in the cards and just a natural association with the development of Marcellus, of the shale gas in West Virginia. And if that's so, with no significant obstacles. On the other hand, is this something that's a possibility, but there are really some obstacles here because of economic competition or whatever? And if there are obstacles to it, what are those obstacles as you see them?
Well, one is just capital. So it would take to build out, so the storage and trading hub, there's storage containers, but there's also a lot of pipeline that connects industrial sites. And so we're talking an investment on the order of $6 to $8 billion. And so there's certainly a capital hurdle, a large capital hurdle there. And there's some competing markets. But it is something that is actively moving forward under a 4-state cooperation. And so we have Kentucky, Pennsylvania, Ohio, and West Virginia all working together to try to create the strategy for how to move this forward, move it forward in a public-private partnership manner so that we can have some oversight and then hand it off into the private sector. And so it's something that's moving forward, but it would not move forward without a concerted effort. But we have the concerted effort going on. So, yeah. Well, thank you.